Let's take a look at Unconditional Surrender, World War II in Europe. This is Sal Vasta's recent game. And for a game that is so recent, I actually have some history with it. At one of the Consim World Expos, after having covered Axis Empires, which was also a game Sal Vasta was involved in designing that iteration of the Totaler Krieg family, he suggested this game that he was designing to me, and that, hey, you know, maybe he could put me together a playtest kit. And because I hate printing and putting together my own things, I'm so bad at it. You'll see examples coming up soon. And, you know, then I could do kind of a pre-publication exploration of the system on video. And I did that for the Unconditional Surrender Case Blue scenario, which, if you want to see how the game kind of plays in its core mechanics, I actually go over that there. I'll touch on them here as well, but I went into a lot of detail in how kind of movement and combat and stuff like that works. And it's all very different from most systems that you'll see. The thing it kind of reminds me most of, but it isn't, is Hitler's War, in terms of kind of this, you're doing movement and combat at the same, in the same action. You're kind of, but movement's automatic, and this combat is blowing through enemy units. But there are no combat factors on the units. It's just related. Everything's considered to be approximately the same size, full army groups. It's just a matter of how high the quality is of the units. And most of the units are going to just have national quality. They'll be elite units as well. I've played this since anyway, he sent me a thank you for that in the form of a copy of the game. I had pre-ordered Unconditional Surrender, and then Supreme Commander came out, A World at War, which, you know, I know I'm going to like because I love A3R, but I'm not sure that there was room in my collection for another for an advanced copy of Advanced Third Reich, right? And the Pacific version as well, which I also have. And then there were a couple others on the horizon. And it's just like, my God, there are so many interesting World War II strategic games that I kind of withdrew my pre-order on this. So I'm glad I would not have gotten a copy of it if I hadn't gotten the thank you. Simply because, you know, there comes a point where you just say, I think I actually do have enough. This is an interesting game. I'm intrigued by it. But some of the things that it does are similar to other games, even if it has a very unique system of its own. They're similar enough in feel. And then one thing that I can reflect on directly from the playings that I've had, at least in the tactical level, at that scale, this is, or not tactical scale, obviously, but the operational level of playing out the movement in combat, doing Barbarossa, doing some of the introductory scenarios here, is that this is very much a thinking man's game. You know, you're trying to figure out what your best way of getting, you know, your optimized odds on a particular attack. It's also hard to attack in, and I find that a little frustrating. Because of the thinking man's aspect, you really have to kind of plan out what you're going to do. On the strategic, maybe not so much as Axis Empires, though. I feel like you can kind of wing this a little more. I may be completely wrong about that, and we'll see, because I am going to kind of wing it. All right, let's take a look at some of the rules. I'm not going to go into complete detail here. Well, let's look at some of the pieces and some of what you get. The first thing you notice is the map. Ooh boy, that looks weird, doesn't it? This is an odd sort of projection, I think off the polar scale. And what comes really cool off of this, even though it looks weird as hell to those of us who are used to the normal maps, is I think it retains the right area per hex. That you have to kind of distort what we normally see as a map in order to maintain the proper scale on a map. So, in a sense, you're going to get a more real representation of what the distances are The problem is that it is so alien, at least to me, that there's kind of this recoiling from it, saying, "My God, what the hell is this?" But that's why it's there. Yeah. Let's keep looking at some pieces here. Everybody's got their own little player aid card. Now, before I decided to throw out another table, I was gonna, and I could have easily done this, have everybody share one of these, because essentially you have a series of tracks that take care of national will, and this is important. National will is the important factor in terms of how you defeat nations in this. Now, to me, that's a big shining point, but national will is going to be handled kind of simplistic in this. It's not like Le Grand Guerre where things are moving all over the place on there, and here it's a pretty linear track. You get down to 0 and your country collapses. And then these are for tracking your factories, and these are not. See, I was double using because I had the rules spread out here for the minor scenarios. These are for tracking your factory counts, and then also any factories that you've lost or tracked on there. Now, that's not actually lost factories. It's factories that you don't get to count because of strategic warfare, and we'll see how that works. Extra factories are ones that aren't on the map, and then you've got these production points, which are really the equivalent of your Third Reich BRPs. They're your production value. Now, you're going to use them for a lot more in this game than you use production for in most games. In most games, you buy your units, right? And maybe buy research in the more complex games or something like that. Buy diplomacy. Well, you do buy diplomacy here, but you also have to pay to move all your units. Somewhat similar to the offensives in WIF, except every single unit that you move, every single ground unit that you move, you're going to have to pay for. Now, you don't have to pay for air and naval assets. They have their own cost, however. They are going to accumulate friction in the form of these sorties here each time they do something, and in order to remove them, you have to pay for them. And they also become less effective, so they degrade over time. So not only are you paying to use them, they're also becoming less effective as you use them. One thing I want to point out, we got a little bag of these things that have this little yellow triangle in them. You can just put these aside in a bag. None of them are fully supported by the game, although there's explanations for some of these. For example, and you could throw some of them in as an option. The snafu counters, both players have these. If these were treated just as normal events that each person has, you could throw them into play, and they give you a die roll modifier opposed to the person who's using them. It's just a -1 die roll modifier to that opponent, and then they function pretty much as other events do, which we'll get to as well. But there's kind of you could add that one easily, but some of the others, what does it mean to add rockets? I've got the rules for how they'll work, but I've got to come up with my own kind of rules for why I want to include them. Now, obviously the Germans actually use rockets, so I'm assuming that this is assuming a more impressive rocket production and effectiveness than historically was achieved, because they are optional, and you'd think, I'm assuming at the scale they were used, they were just not considered significant enough, and maybe counted in under other things like the strategic warfare, for example. You have little counter mixes for all the different nations in the game. The counters themselves, like I said, the infantry, the ground units, you got no strength points on them. You got your air units, forts. There are garrisons kicking around here, which, I can't remember what they do. I'm not sure they can even move. I'll have to look that up. I haven't played with any of them in the scenarios that I did for training, so they didn't come up into play. You have a couple of diplomatic chits. These little markers to indicate nations. These will also end up in the diplomatic chit cup at times, I think. But these, through events, They can't go in there naturally, which was something I had to try to figure out. Control markers for 3 different factions. This is at heart a 3-player game like Hitler's War. In that, okay, these except for one special scenario, the post-World War II immediate, Patton rolls into the Russian scenario, there's no real opportunity for the Allies to squabble directly. But they are competing with each other for the control of the world. And I think that's almost a necessary position to look at World War II strategically, and the conflict between especially Churchill and Stalin as to who was going to control Europe in the long run is in some ways the backdrop behind the war. You have to defeat the Nazis, but anything else here? Oh yeah, the player aid cards. Okay, these are sweet. So there's actually more than I have kicking around here. For every faction, there's a set of player aid cards, and they come with this folder here, which is going to give you some most of what you need here. Charts and tables, some reminders of stuff. The base combat is all in here. You use the same combat system pretty much for everything, even strategic warfare, ground warfare, air, naval. It's all going to use the same core system and same table. However, the way you interpret it is different, so there's a lot of different charts for each of the different things, and that all kind of works out the same. But it makes it easier in terms of you don't have to, learn a new system for each thing. They all work kind of the same. Cost for production, reminders on conditional events. We're going to have to worry about these. These are sort of political in effect. There are also, if you remember, Axis empires had policies. That's translated into here, and some of them don't really feel too much like they're policies, but they seem to just be general rules in the game, like you can't violate a neutral without declaring war on them. But it could be that there are going to be expansions or whatever to this game that allow for things that don't really fit in historical Europe of the war. A summary of all the things that are going to affect national will, and then the movement point costs. One thing you'll notice, not only do they not have combat factors, they also don't have movement factors. The movement factors are very easy in the game. Most ground units have a movement factor of 10. Some of the things get a little complicated because when you start talking about air units, they have different ranges depending on the mission they take. And unfortunately, I don't think there's a summary of those in here. There's a summary of the combat effects of them, but for the ranges of them, you kind of have to look it up. Now, that's not the only, this may be the other one and I just threw it in there. There's also this additional player aid, which again, there's 3 copies of, one for each player, that gives 2 things. This is the overall sequence of play of the game. It's presented to you as a flow chart. And basically each phase is going to be played by each faction, and then you move to the next phase. And then here in the operation phase, that gets blown up. Aha, here's where it is. Yes, this is useful. For all the different actions that you can take. Now the operations phase is going to be a set, basically it's an I go, you go system, but you get to pick one unit, move it, do combat with it, engage in special operations and such not with it, like, an airstrike or something like that. And then you get to do another unit, and then you get to do another unit. And there's one way to allow units to coordinate. It's an assault attack. Generally not a great idea if you've got quality troops, because, you can blitz better by breaking open a hole in the enemy line with one of your units and then pushing through with another unit and so on. Kind of like in Hitler's War. If you've watched my video on that, you can see how that works there. Well, this whole game is built around that kind of fluid, sequencing of your own turn, where you get to choose which unit you want to push the first hole through with, and then how you want to react as you go. And that works very nicely. But yes, this will give you the different air actions. It doesn't give you the ranges on them. It does give you an index into the rules for each of those actions. So it's not too bad, and you do tend to remember them. There aren't that many different actions available. And the naval ones work a little bit more similarly to each other. It's the air ones that have different ranges is all. Let's see what else we got here. Anything else that I wanted to talk about? These are optional. I should take them off the board. And I'll put them away. And I probably have some optionals in the Italians because I haven't sorted them in some of the minor nations. All right. Let's look at that sequence of play, and we'll talk a little bit about the core sequence of the game, and then I'm not going to talk too much about the political side of the game, although that may be the thing that interests me the most about this, in the same way as it does with Axis Empires and some others. I haven't been able to play with it. There's a scenario where you get to play with the first year of the war's political, but I really want to put it through its paces, and I don't think I can really talk about it too much until after I've done so. I'll give some of the core of the ideas, though. All right, so you open up with a weather phase. Now, the game comes with bigger dice than these. I toss them aside because I like these little guys. They're nice. GMT's putting out good dice, very much like these high impact rounded corners, but big dice, and I don't like big dice. So they come up with 3 colors, 3 dice, 1 for each zone. You roll the dice, you look it up on a table, and you see what the weather's going to be. And you have basically 4 weather zones. The first one is below this yellow line, and that's going to be always in good weather. Then between that and here, and that's going to be the warm zone, and then between here and this kind of bluish line, and that's kind of the mild temperate zone, and then we get into the cold zone where you're going to get the nasty winters in Russia and such. There's more to make the winters nasty in Russia, but that's an event chit. Events are kept over here. Let's talk a little more about these boxes. Events are kept over here in your holding box, and essentially you get to play them. And in some cases they make perfect sense. For example, an event is like these tank resources that you can apply to an attack to give yourself the advantages that an armored unit would have. Other things in here are just little holding boxes to keep track of. So for example, when a unit gets eliminated, so you can't rebuild it right away, it has to wait a turn. Upgrades, units that come on the map. So that's what that means. Units that come off these boxes will be upgrades for other units, and you have the option to bring them in as replacements for to replace them on the map. Noting seated areas. These conditional is basically just a holding box for a lot of stuff that you could get, either reinforcements, events, or other things that you get through the game. And events or pretty much events, those are all based on events, because anything else is going to be here on the time track over there. And you'll notice one thing, you have 2 time and 2 weather and 2 pulse tracks, and you don't have counters for all of those. What it works out as is there's scenarios that work on just one map, rather than fill out, force the players to fold up a map and have the little turn record track on the other. There's enough room for this. Honestly, this is better than putting a chart here and saving a little space on the player aid charts, because only one person's going to be able to see a chart over there on the board, so having the turn record tracks duplicated, the weather tracks duplicated, that's fine. You also have, of course, off-map boxes. We're all used to that kind of stuff. Okay, let's look back here. Okay, declaration of war. Now, like I said, I'm a little iffy on the politics, but one of the things that this game starts with is there's multiple options of what game you want to play. If you're playing the whole shebang. One is the historical start. Germany is going to attack Poland, and the Western Allies are going to support them. There's also an option where Germany can attack Poland and the Russians support them. I'm a little queasy about that idea in many ways, but you can choose one of those 2 as your opening game maneuver. There's another one, which is roll a die, 50-50. And the Germans don't really, neither side gets to control how the war is going to start. And I think you have to start in Poland there too. And then there's a wide open scenario, which is really puts things in the Germans' hands, which is Germany can attack anything they like. And they can more or less choose to make either the Western Allies or the Russians fight the war. Let's look at the declaration of war rules, though, because I haven't been paying too much attention to those. I figure I'll pay attention to them, when they happen. But, okay, so one of the key factors is two of the policies that are out there are appeasement and the Soviet Nazi pact. If either of them is in play, none of the Allies can declare war on anyone. Now, when you declare war on a country, it activates and joins an enemy faction. You're allowed to declare war on the factions. And this is how it kind of works, is that the Germans, this is the argument behind Germany being able to force a war with Russia. If the Germans accepted the appeasement and said to Churchill, look, when it comes down to it, I just want to go beat some Soviet ass, you think Churchill would have been okay with that? Well, I don't know. Here's where I get trouble with that is Czechoslovakia is already gone. Austria is already absorbed. These demands on Poland, by that point, you're almost setting up a different war. Now, I may do that just because I'm very curious about how the system handles that war, because there's some neat factors to it that you can't touch any other way. And I've seen so many games playing out World War II, the way World War II goes. If I can't have the full flexibility of a whiff type days of decision, which I now own, experience, well, maybe I can at least have this experience of, well, let's play the what if Germany is able to attack Russia. Now, I don't know if I want to start things off in Poland. I've got to think a little bit about some of the factors there. But yeah, there's not a lot here on declaration of war. Okay, the economic phase. So for this, what happens here, this breaks into a couple of places. The first thing you do is you count up your factories for each country. For most countries, most minor countries at least, the amount of factories you have is going to be marked on the production chart on that faction as the production value. So for example, over here in the Netherlands, there's one factory, and I'm going to have one production in the Netherlands, and that gives me 1 point. I can either move a unit, or I can use it to try to rebuild a unit or something like that. I'm not going to have a lot there. Some of the larger countries, though, like Spain, have multiple factories. So if they get involved in the war, they're going to be a little bit more capable of doing things than the other minors. But for the major powers, we've got something a little different. They all have a production multiplier, and I believe it's ×2 on everyone, at least at the start of the game. There might be some modifiers, but I don't think so. And what you do is you count up your total number of factories, and you multiply it. Now, 3 countries at least, Germany, Russia, and England, have this minimum factories lost number. They're going to have a counter there, and it's over here in the conditional box on all of them. Once they go to war, they end up with a point in factories lost, and that actually subtracts from their total onboard count. Now, the onboard count itself gets modified when you capture factories. So if I take Frankfurt from Germany, Germany will lose one of its onboard factory markers until it regains it. Notably in this game, you can't conquer enemy factories in general and turn them to your own production. And the argument there is that the cost of doing so, it was done. There's no argument there. The cost of doing so in terms of partisans, in terms of the difficulty of setting up the infrastructure to work there, really didn't pay off all that well. And that most games make conquest too valuable for countries, that their production ends up based on it. And then you end up with some kind of silly stuff, as I've seen in some World War II games, where the Western allies are actually conquering countries in order to bring their production on board. Now, in a lot of games like a Third Reich, you don't really give a shit, right? You're not spending all your production points a lot of times. Because you start accumulating, your economy grows, etc. And it's really not that big a deal. And in fact, in this one, it might not be either. If, Germany grew to its size and got to add those extra factories, well, then Germany would have a powerful economy, but to tell you the truth, it really just wouldn't matter. However, it would affect the strategic warfare. It would mean that Germany would always be able to build and do whatever it wanted, and that seems a little unreasonable. So it serves as a further limitation there. Anyway, that's going to be the points you have. You put them down on your production. That's all you do in the economic phase, is actually just count things. But then you go to the strategic warfare phase, and you're going to conduct a battle. And I'll talk more about battles when we go to combat in the normal type. Well, let's talk about it. So the basic idea behind battles is that each person's going to get a die. They're going to have a series of modifiers, and one person's the attacker. He adds his modifiers to his die roll. The other's the defender. He adds his modifiers to his die roll. Some of those modifiers may be negative. So if an attacker is attacking into a city, he gets a negative modifier. That makes sense because he's actually reducing the amount of losses that he's causing to the enemy through the defensive terrain, rather than necessarily taking more, or whatever you want to take a look at it that as. But the chart, while not symmetrical, is close to it. So basically what's going to happen is really, this is at a very abstracted level, it's going to be a success or failure kind of thing. Although there are degrees in the air combat, etc. Okay, so you look at the modifiers here, and in this case, things that help the submarine war are going to give pluses to the Axis faction. And these are divided by who they face. So the Soviets having port in Sea Zone 6 helps them against the Soviets. Sea Zone 6 is up there. So, if we're able to cut the Murmansk line better, we're going to do more damage to the Soviets than historically was done. Likewise, I think some of the channel ports and stuff like that are going to give you a modifier on this table in your favor. On the other hand, for the Allies, one of the big things they get a modifier in their favor for is bombing cities. And that'll be German production cities, and they get points for that on their die roll. When you compare the two dice, you come up with a result, okay, which is either going to be affecting the defender, affecting the attacker badly, or an in-between result. And then you look that result up in the particular type of combat you're looking at. So in the strategic combat, if you get a no result, both people kind of recover their factories. You haven't done much damage to each other. But on the other side, if you get a defender result or an attacker bad result, basically what happens is the side that won that result gets to decrease their factories, their damaged factories by 1, and they get to increase their opponent's damaged factories by 1, which of course will then affect their next turn production for the person who's been damaged and the person who recovers. But you can never go above the maximum or below the minimum. And the minimum of 1 is worse than your peacetime production, essentially. So what that means is some of the strategic warfare effects are just baked into the system. You will always be paying 1 factory's worth of production if you're one of the 3 big powers in order to pursue the strategic war, even if you're not taking any damage from it necessarily. The extra planes and ships and whatnot. Okay, so that's what strategic warfare does. It affects your total number of factories you'll have available for the next turn. And that's done down here after that. Then we go to strategic movement phase. Strategic movement's pretty limited. You're going to use an event counter for this. Each faction has one, I think. Let's see, the Western, yeah, the Western are using a U.S. colored one, but that's for all of them. And that's going to allow you to, I believe, move infinitely long against along a rail or road hex sides. And you can leave an enemy zone of control, but you can't enter one. And you keep your strategic movement counter on top of that, which, among other things, indicates that you can't do strategic movement again. It also indicates you can't activate that unit during your operational phase, but it doesn't provide any defensive penalty to you. Then we go to the operations phase, and this is the meat of the system. And if you really want to see more detail on that, go to my USE Case Blue, the print and play game scenario, to really look at the description of it. But like I said, what you're going to be doing, you're going to be following this, and you get to pick one of these actions, do it, pick another action, do it, right? You're going to have to pay for your military units. The combat always works like this on this same chart, but it might come from different things. So the ground combat relations are very different. So all German units in ground combat get a +2 to their combat roll. All French, UK, and US get a +1. Other units, though, might get different modifiers. So like, you know, a neutral doesn't get any modifier for that. If you end up isolated is an interesting idea in this game. Isolated means that you don't have a buddy next to you. It's not a supply state. That's a different thing. Supply can also reduce your ability to fight. If you're isolated, it means that you don't have either a neighbor next to you or a city next to you that you can rely on to help support you. Now, I think it also may have to do with retreat capability. I think you also have to be surrounded. Defender has no eligible retreat hex and is not a J. Yeah. So you want to have a flank protected, but as long as you have a retreat hex available to you, you're not going to be isolated because you can trace back to a safe place. But as long as you have a buddy next to you, you're also not isolated and you don't take that penalty. Now, air and naval actions, these are somewhat more complicated. So in the midst of a ground, let me explain how ground combat works on a very basic high level, because I don't want to go into too much detail on this one since I did cover that in the other one. So when you decide to activate a unit, the first thing is you have to pay for the unit if it's a ground unit. And let's assume that for now. So what you do is we have a production cost to activate leg units, activate pretty much anything that's not a leg unit. It's going to cost you 1 or 2 of your production points. Don't worry about this. You got plenty of them. At least in the learning scenarios, I did not run out. But I assume as the war goes on and strategic warfare takes a toll, it will get tougher. And then that gives you a certain amount of movement points with that unit. Now the movement points for a leg unit are going to be 8, and for a mobile it's going to be 10. Half that if you're out of supply, I think. Low supply may have a penalty as well, I'm not sure. Or in the same penalty, really. And then you just look up on your movement allowance costs, and you're allowed to move. Now, most hexes, well, clear hexes cost 1, but most terrain is going to cost you a little bit additional. You start spending your movement points. You come up into an enemy zone of control. Now, if you start in one, you're allowed to leave it. If you start your activation in a zone of control, you can leave it. But if you're in the midst of your operation and you're in an enemy zone of control, you have to do one of 2 things. You either have to stop your activation, which can involve putting an assault marker pointing at one of the units that you're adjacent to, indicating that you're going to do a set piece battle. You can only do that if you haven't done any mobile attacks yet. The other thing you can do is you can do a mobile attack. And a mobile attack, you have to pay the movement point to enter the hex that you're attacking, plus I believe 1. And then you're going to try not to destroy the Egyptian garrison there. See, I'm on this damn tether now because I ran out of power on my camera, and it's a mess. God damn it. I got a little bit more play there. Okay, and then you go through the different combines there. Terrain obviously has some effect, status, etc. You roll off that pair of dice, and you come up with a result. And, you know, when you're rolling a pair of dice comparing to each other, there is a sort of bell curve involved in it, but the modifiers give you a lot of play. The modifiers can't go higher than plus or minus 10, though, on any given side. Anyway, then you compare, you get a result, and basically the results are retreat results for the defender, DD, which is disrupted, it reduces the unit by a step and pushes it out. DE, it eliminates the defender. Attacker stopped. The attacker just doesn't get to keep going. He used up all his movement points at that point. And once you do a mobile attack, you can no longer do an assault. And then attacker attrition, the attacker takes a step loss and is stopped. Those are pretty much your responses that can happen. Now, you also have these pluses coming after there. Don't worry about them. Those are used only in the air and naval combat. As far as I know. I'm just not sure. Maybe there's some other kind of combat I'm not thinking of here. But you've got certain restrictions to your retreat. Stacking. There's no stacking in this game. You are allowed to move through your own units as long as they're not in an enemy zone of control. The problem with being in an enemy zone of control is if you move into a hex that's in an enemy zone of control. So if I move, say, from here to here, I'm stopped. Now, if there's no stacking and I move on to one of my units and it's in an enemy zone of control, I've got a problem, right? Because I got to stop and I can't stop. And that's why you're not allowed to do that. But you could have a plane stacked there, a boat. You just can't have two ground units stacked there. You can only have one plane as well. Okay. So in the midst of the combat, one of the little clever things here, at least ground combat, is there's a lot of these counters. I'm not sure why there's so many. But basically each player, like, I feel like there should either be 3 or 2. 3 is probably the right number. Each player slaps one of these down, covers it up as either will commit or will not commit. If you put will not commit, it means you're just going in there with your ground troops. If you put will commit, you have the requirement to do at least one of these and the option to do more, to play as many events that affect the combat as you wish. So, for example, you could throw tanks in if you were allowed to. So the tanks could only go for the French because they're actually locked into a nationality. Or you could perform one air support combat. Now, if both people conduct air support into the hex, they fight an air combat. And that air combat result, if it's slanted towards the defender or attacker, if the defender takes a damage result, for example, they're going to not be able to apply their bonus for tactical support there, for the air support there. If, on the other hand, it ends up on the diamond, well, both sides get to apply air support. I'm sorry, I lied. The DR and AS also allow you to both receive the air support. Okay. The number here comes into play because if you fight out an air or naval battle, here's what happens. You get these little sortie markers. So if I get a +2 on here, I'm going to take 2 sorties for that. I'm only allowed 6 of them, and then I'm not allowed to fly anymore. It doesn't destroy my plane. But it's effectively almost as bad. Now, if one of the big modifiers in air-to-air combat or air-naval combat or whatever is the amount of sorties you have. They become a penalty to your combat value or to your combat die roll. So that's a big deal. Sometimes your combat die rolls are going to be halved too. So let's take a look here. After rolling the combat dice, if somebody's got no supply, their total for their die roll, including all bonuses, gets cut in half. Severe weather cuts you in half. Now that's kind of weird because both sides are cut in half. So you're really kind of narrowing the results and making it less likely anything exciting is going to happen. Forts also cut in half. Now for air units, let's see if anything. No supply. That's not too likely. And severe weather. In a fight over a sea zone or something. Okay. So the result is kind of, hey, did you get through with your mission and does that get accomplished? And also, how many sorties did you pick up? All right. For other air and naval actions, you basically do a mission. And if you're... Some of those missions can be intercepted, and if you're intercepted, you fight out a battle, and it's kind of like the airstrike, the air support mission, which can't be intercepted directly. You roll and you see what happens. So, for example, an escorting mission could get a failure, which then allows you to spend another attack on other units there. Now, one rule here is whenever you do a mission, it's going to cost you at least one sortie. But that sortie's not charged till you're done. And it's not charged if you take damage. Okay? So if you do an air support mission and you fight out of combat and one person takes 2 sortie damage, and I think the way these are written out, the winning side always takes 1. Well, then they go back and they don't take an additional 1. But if you fly an air support mission and nobody interdicts and nobody else is in there, there's no enemy air support. Well, you take 1 for flying the sortie anyway, so you're always going to take some damage. There's another mission which is air strikes, which basically you can use these to attack other air units. Now, so the air support missions have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hex range, but the air strikes have a 7 hex range, which means that you can attack enemy air units further away then you could provide ground support or bombing or whatever to. And that's kind of an interesting factor. That's basically a kludge. It's not saying that the planes could fly further if they're doing counter-air missions, although maybe they could because they're not carrying as much payload, perhaps. But it's saying that the threat of the enemy moving towards, say, your dangerous areas, you're performing air superiority missions. You're not fighting necessarily over the enemy hex. You're fighting over their front line or something. And it works out perfectly fine. It's just, if you have any questions kind of in your head about that, there's a reason it's done that way, and it's a little inelegant there, but it's easier than making the complex kind of rules that would, try to make sense, which would involve, maybe hidden missions like in Gulf Strike or something. All right. After you do your I don't want to go too much into the actions, although there are more there. One of the actions is supply, which I'll hit in a moment. After you do your your actual actions that you want to do, you hit supply check. And basically you have to trace supplies back to your home country capital, sort of. To not home country capital, to a home country city, maybe a factory, I'm not sure. But it's fairly easy for the Germans or French to do that to their own. It's a little tougher for the English, though. They have to trace back to England. And in order to do so, they need to set up a convoy. That convoy has to be on a port that they can trace from. So they can't leave a convoy over here in Britain and trace supply from France. They have to have the convoy in, say, Cherbourg, as an example. And what you do is you trace your supply line back to that unit, and then the convoy spends essentially a sortie per unit that it's going to support. It is possible that could get intercepted. There's naval interception. I think that has a range of 2 naval zones, these numbered areas. There's also air interception, which has a range of 1 in general. Trying to think if there's any other way. Anyway, therefore you might want to commit an escort to protect it. And you can actually commit 2 escorts, 1 naval and 1 air. They all have to start stacked together. So if the English want to land the BEF over here in France, they're going to have to put naval supplies, naval support into France itself. In a sense, the rule basically comes down to you can actually supply about 2 units per navy, per convoy, without things starting to degenerate on you. The reason for that is you're going to be allowed to rebuild 2 sorties per turn, so you can supply 2 units with 2 sorties. But that's assuming nothing goes wrong, right? All right. Okay, now if you're out of supply, first of all, you get a marker. And your marker is a slow degradation. If you can't trace... If you can trace to the proper supply source, you're in supply, everything's fine and great. If you can't trace to a proper supply source, but you can trace to, say, another country's capital, so for example, British forces could trace to France's capital, and there's a few other places that are these limited supply, you get a low supply marker. But if you can't trace at all, you also get this degrading supply. The first thing you get is a low supply marker if you didn't have a no supply. And then the second turn that you're out of supply, you're going to get this no supply marker. And these have an effect on your combat and your movement, etc. And eventually, they actually start doing losses to you. So if you have no supply, you will be eliminated if you're sitting there with no supply at that point. You're also allowed to voluntarily eliminate things that are out of supply. And the reason you might want to do that is it can prevent you from losing national will. I'm not sure how the national will is written here. Yeah, it's only in combat that you lose points for units. So that's not a big deal. All right, now you're allowed to buy units, and these are replacement strength points that when a unit gets hit in combat, remember it might get flipped, well, you can pay to recover them. They have to be in supply, and you pay off your production points. And it's fairly cheap, really, to rebuild your units. We've got it listed here. It's 1 point for leg, 2 points for mobile, 3 points to remove 2 sorties from a fighter, convoy, etc. And as you get to the more and more advanced units, it starts costing a lot. Like carriers cost, what, 5 points? 5 points to take 2 sorties off of them. So they're very expensive. All right, then after that, you're allowed to mobilize units, and they have to be over in your mobilization box. And then what you do is you buy a flipped over unit in general. The Russians are able to buy full strength units in some cases. Maybe other people are too. Let me see if garrisons are able to be bought. Nope. And here also you can mobilize a fighter or convoy, but it comes on the board with 4 sorties on it. It's already very damaged. You're going to have to build it back up. Now, did we skip the diplomacy phase? Apparently not. All right. Now, a thing to note here is that units that you lost on this turn go in the eliminated box. At the end of the turn, they're going to move to the mobilization box. So you can't just keep recycling your units the way you did in good old Third Reich. Your losses have to stay out for a turn. In the diplomacy phase, now this is kind of weird. You don't do the diplomacy phase if there's no policy of appeasement, Nazi-Soviet pact, or the Moscow Treaty. The Moscow Treaty is basically a peace treaty that's going to come if Russia's defeated, if they collapse. Then they sit out of the war for a while. Let's see. So the way you do the diplomacy, I think you're allowed 1 action per faction. And I think it costs you 5 of your production points. I'm kind of bullshitting this right now. Yeah. And your choice is to either draw an event from here, and at the beginning of the game, the only things in there are diplomatic success, no event, and diplomatic failure. No events does nothing. Whatever you get kind of goes in here. But the other thing you can spend 5 for is to take something from here and drop it into the cup. Oh, there's one more. There's Area Seized, which is the Soviet event. Basically, they're able to grab lands in East Europe, Bessarabia, the Baltic states one at a time, East Poland. They're able to grab those. Now, there's effects to doing that, and those effects may not be entirely positive. This is a way to knock, Romania into the pro-German camp, etc. So that's kind of a factor in there. Now, I can't really speak too much about how that's going to work. We're going to see that in action. But basically, you have this choice between drawing from a cup that's not terribly positive to begin with, or throwing things in from here. Now, these guys can end up in there. They're events that favor just one faction, but you're not allowed to just pick them up and buy them into there, as far as I can tell. The way the rules are written about that, it doesn't seem to really, highlight that you're not allowed to, but I don't see any indication that you're not allowed to. These rules are actually very good at telling you, no, you can't do that in most places. So it is kind of puzzling to me that they don't say that there. But they are also very explicit about you draw it from here, and that those things don't show up here. And here they actually say, exception, pro-faction markers don't go in here. And that's covered in the rules as well somewhere. All right, victory check. Victory check in this is a little weird. Right now we have this appeasement or pact ends. At some point or another, that's going to turn into a scenario ends. Likewise, U.S. entry is somewhat randomized. All these units that are on the board, that's not the turn that they necessarily will show up. This is an option. You can play this game with fixed entry dates, or you can play it with, this is when this production was kind of heading, and you roll a die and see when each unit actually shows up. I like more randomness in my games, so that's what I went with, is with the rolling the dice. And then in the end of the turn phase, well, here, largely what happens, your eliminated units shift over, you move the turn marker forward, and you have to dispose of the units that are on the board here. Now, disposing of them means, hey, if the turn marker reaches them, maybe they go onto your tracks, and they may go in different places. Some may go into your conditional, some may go into your events, some may go into your mobilization pool so you can build more new units. Some may conceivably come right on the map immediately. I don't know if any do that, but I think some do. I think the French airplanes at the beginning of the game do. But others are these variable, most of these are variable reinforcements, so you'll roll a die and move them forward. And then there's going to be kind of some complexity with that, just mechanically trying to remember which units have already rolled their dice and which haven't. I'll probably rotate them or whatever just to help with that. Obviously, you can play with the fixed dates for the units, and then it's not a problem with that. And then you start the cycle all over again. Now, there was something I wanted to think of, but there's this weird noise coming from outside, and it's really freaking me out. There was something I wanted to discuss about that events. I don't know. Well, I'm sure we'll get to it through the playthrough, and if you're not going to watch the playthrough, well, this gives you some idea anyway.